Hello, everyone, and welcome to this live interview. I'm Stan Berteloot, the host of Back in America, a podcast questioning America's identity, value, and culture. This is part of a series of interviews of the crew of the EPIX BBC docuseries Enslaved, the lost history of the transatlantic slave trade, starring Samuel L. Jackson. The transatlantic slave trade saw more than 12 million Africans taken across the Atlantic in 45,000 voyages over 400 years. Many did not survive the journey. Joining me today is Kramer Wimberley, a diver for the series. Kramer Wimberley is based in Florida, where he leads the maritime archaeology program, Diving with a Purpose. Hello, Kramer, and welcome to Back in America.
Good morning, Stan. How are you?
I'm good. So, what is Diving with a Purpose?
Diving with a Purpose is a maritime archaeology survey program. Right? It was started back in 2004 with the intent of locating a particular slave ship that was found that was known to have wrecked in the Florida Keys. Right?
Okay. And where does it stand today?
Well, we've been, just a little context, right? There was one archaeologist in Biscayne National Park where a documentary was being filmed based on attempting to locate this particular slave ship. And her name was Brenda Lazendorf, and she was, as the lone archaeologist in the park, right? She didn't have the capacity to dive and survey the hundreds of wrecks that were in the park alone, because you have to have a buddy with you in order to dive. So there are literally hundreds of wrecks in the national park that had not been documented, and she was looking for help to get some of those ships documented and hopefully identify the final resting place of the slave ship Guerrero. Right. So she met Ken Stewart, who was at the time the regional director of the National Association of Black Scuba Divers. Right. And he asked her if anyone could do it. And she said she could train anybody who wanted to learn. And he went home and called a host of friends to say, instead of just diving recreationally or diving for fun, why don't we dive for a purpose and try and find the slave ship? And Diving with a Purpose was born. And we've been working.
And did you find it?
No, not yet. We have surveyed dozens of ships in the national park and in the Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuary. And we've removed a number of ships from the possibility, and we've identified a number of artifacts that could potentially be the final resting place of the Guerrero. Right? But it hasn't been definitively determined as of yet, and we're hoping through one or two additional more missions where we are surveying the remaining areas that haven't been surveyed, that we can definitively say that we have located the wreck of the Guerrero. But it is predominantly going to be by a preponderance of evidence, as opposed to finding a particular artifact that says Guerrero on the side of it.
Okay. All right. Okay. And we are going to talk about slave ship in just a minute as we touch on the docuseries Enslaved. Before we do that, as we were chatting earlier on, I learned that you were, earlier on in your career, you were an arson investigator. Help me understand how you transitioned from being that to playing a key role in the series.
Wow. I don't really know that I would say I transitioned from one to the other, because diving and being in the water has been in my blood for all of my life, right? And I was diving at the point when I joined the fire service. I was also a diver.
Wow. Okay.
So I spent almost 30 years in the fire service, right? In the fire service, during the course of that journey, I went to law school. When I got out of law school, the department saw an opportunity for me to assist them in the Division of Investigations. So I went to the police academy, right? So, because in New Jersey, at least, only firefighters can be certified as arson investigators. So, I went to the police academy, became an arson investigator, and worked with a very skilled team of people for a number of years. And our unit was the largest one in the state of New Jersey. So, analyzing and investigating crime scenes was part of my background prior to coming to Diving with a Purpose, which substantially is an investigative mechanism for sifting through the remains of shipwrecks. That's the link or the connection.
Okay. And were you already very interested in social issues and racial issues?
I don't know that I could say I was already interested in racial issues, and social issues have always been part of my life and my upbringing from as far back as I can remember. My first contact with the police department was actually in Boston. I was born in Boston, right? And at 5 years old, I remember the police kicking in the door of my family's home and us being on the floor in the corner with shotguns pointed in our faces. And that was my introduction to the police department.
Wow.
And injustice.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So, and then just growing up, after that particular experience, my family moved from Boston to New Jersey. Right? I was around 5 years old at the time, so the better part of my life, I was raised in and around Newark, New Jersey. So I'm a kid from the bricks.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't say social justice. It's just living in an area where racism runs as a thread through every area of human activity for the entirety of your life, on some level, either makes you an advocate, right, in the event that you engage, right, or a victim in the event that you don't, or blinded to it in the event that you're trying to hide from the reality of what African Americans face on a daily basis everywhere.
Right. And so let's talk about this engagement, and let's talk about how you became part of this team. First, how did the Enslaved team find you?
I've been working or volunteering with the National Park Service as a member of Diving with a Purpose for almost 10 years. Right? There was a large effort that was being conducted by the National Park Submerged Resource Center in attempting to a mission to find the Guerrero about 3 or 4 years ago, right? Because they brought so much manpower to bear, right, to do this particular mission. I believe the Park Service decided that they wanted to video document the work that they were doing. And the documentarian posted the work that had been done online, right?
Okay.
I didn't realize it had been posted, but it had been posted online, and associated producers, the people who created and were the driving force behind Enslaved, saw that documentary and reached out to me
Okay.
to say, "You were in that documentary. We want you to be in ours." And I didn't believe them because I didn't know that the documentary had been posted. I thought it was some kind of scam because I got a cold call from an international phone number from outside of the country from a gentleman with a Russian accent saying, "We want you to be in our movie." So, yeah,
And you didn't believe it, right?
didn't believe it. Hung up the phone, right? And he called back and I hung up the phone again. Then he reached out to the uh, Ken Stewart, who's the coordinator for the program, to say, we're trying to put this guy in our film, but he doesn't believe that we are who we are. So could you please get in contact with him? So Ken called me, said they're legitimate. Please speak with them.
That's a good story. I love it. And here you were, and now part of the crew. So in your own words, what is Enslaved trying to achieve?
I'm thankful for the director and the executive producers who saw or had a vision of doing what it is that they eventually did with Enslaved, which is what Diving with a Purpose has been doing since its inception in 2004, 2005, which was to take the story, right, and share it to begin conversation about the tragedy of the transatlantic slave trade. Right, it's in history, it's documented, but it's not something that globally we have ever really come to terms with. So I believe, and this is my opinion, is that the series was attempting to engage the public in a conversation, a full-throated conversation about the transatlantic slave trade and the people who were lost that never made it.
Do you know how many people died?
That's a very broad question, and I'm going to need more context.
Well, in those journey taken from Africa to, yeah.
Estimates are about 2 million people of what has been estimated at, conservatively estimated at 12 million people involved in the slave trade. Over 2 million of them perished en route on the journey.
Wow. And what did you learn doing that documentary? What did you learn that you didn't already know?
As a student of history, right, much of the information was familiar to me, right? I would have to say what I learned was people at the time and still today refuse to believe that it occurred, right? And the inhumanity and the brutality of what took place actually occurred, right? And we still don't want to confront the reality of it. The reality.
And how did diving on those ships made you understand that?
How did diving on those ships make me understand
the reality and the cruelty?
Well, each one of those ships represents an individual journey for ships that took ships that took multiple journeys.
Right.
So each one of those ships didn't just traffic one time. They went back and forth multiple times, right? Carrying people, killing people, right? And the wrecking event was the last event for those ships.
Mm.
And the wrecking event, right, told a particular story about the Africans who were on that particular ship at that particular time,
Right.
and the inhumanity or the brutality of the people who engaged either in the transport, right, or who engaged in the business of selling people.
Mm.
Right?
Right. In the series, you talk about one particular ship in Surinam, and you describe that as being a pretty tough dive and pretty tough, adventure. Can you tell us a bit about it and what happened there?
Well, the Surinam Mission, right, was around the wreck of the Leusden, right? That that ship, right, carried over 600 Africans, right? And what happened was the captain took a wrong turn. He ended up going up the Moroni River instead of the Surinam River, right? When they recognized they made a wrong turn, they tried to come out, right? And the ship hit a bank, right, and lost its rudder. And eventually, there was a recognition that they weren't going to be able to continue on with the journey, to move their cargo to market.
Right.
It wrecked within a couple of 100 yards of shore, right, in what was less than 50 feet of water. Right?
Mm-hmm.
And instead of disembarking people, right, or allowing them to save themselves, they went through the effort of forcing all of the Africans back below deck, right, hammering the hatches shut, right, because initially they got in their boats and they started to leave. When they realized the Africans were attempting to save themselves, they returned. They went back, forced them all below deck, hammered the hatches shut, right, and then sat on the hatches, right, and waited, right, until every last one of the Africans that they had driven below deck stopped screaming because they had drowned. So they killed over 600 people because they made a wrong turn and wouldn't, and the idea of letting them save themselves was abhorrent.
Wow.
And being in that space some 400 years later, right? And I've said this before, right? Standing on the banks or the shores, a couple of 100 yards from where right, the most horrific, right, wrecking event in the history of the transatlantic slave trade. It's an idyllic location, right? Today, if you look at it, the scenery is absolutely beautiful. It's a place where people would go to vacation.
Mm-hmm.
But the tragedy of what took place, and the sense of the horror still remains there. Right? As beautiful as it is it's just an eerie place to stand there, knowing, right, of the mass murder, the mass grave that is right there in your face.
Wow. The docuseries took 2 years about to film. Am I right?
Yes. A little over 2 years to complete.
And was that event the most disturbing for you?
It's kind of difficult to say that that was the largest, right?
Right.
But researching the individual events to find out about the individual stories, um, and trying to connect to the humanity and the horror of uh, the people who were on board those ships at the time. It's difficult to say this was the move you more, because then you go from there to the London, right, and hear that story, and that is because it's all about death, it's all about horror, it's all about kidnapping and murder and rape and torture. So every one of the stories, absent the Great Lakes and the Freedom Ships, um, evokes very strong emotions and feelings in you, because the loss of one life, right, is horrific, and you're talking about hundreds at a time, potentially.
Do you think that you came out of this experience changed?
Yes, yes, right. And actually, surprisingly for me, change for the better, right? Because I spent a great deal of time in my pain and my anger and my frustration and my rage, with which I and every other person connected to the African slave trade is absolutely entitled to. You're entitled to your feelings about what took place, and what is still taking place today, right? The consequences of those actions still reverberate today, right? Uh, but uh, we closed the series in the Great Lakes.
Huh.
I don't know if that was by design, right, or just by virtue logistically of how the shooting happened, right? But being able to close with uh, the story of resilience, right, and people moving from slavery to freedom uh, makes you hopeful, right? Uh, I was fortunate to work on the Costa Rican mission, right? And there you had uh, Africans who integrated into the Bribri culture in Costa Rica and survived. And even in Surinam, there was resistance, and today there are still communities of I don't want to call them freed, right? Because they freed themselves, right? Uh, who escaped from the barbarity of slavery and established communities for themselves. So there were stories of resilience, stories of freedom, stories of people, in spite of the horrors of what took place, right? Still continuing to move forward. And we applaud and we celebrate those communities, right? But we've never given them justice.
Well, talking of justice, the documentary came out in the spring at a time where all over the world, Black Lives Matter was, frontline. Do you think there is a connection there? And do you think that this docuseries will have a historical impact on social issues?
That's again where I'm hopeful, right? I've seen movements over the course of my lifetime attempting to address a global system of white supremacy, right? That consistently have failed because the system pushes back. This particular time feels a bit different, right? Because there appears to be a global recognition, right, of what Black people have been screaming about for centuries, right? So I'm hopeful, right, that the young people that are pushing this movement forward today, and those people who are finally recognizing the legitimacy of the horror of what is taking place, right, are moved to do something different.
Right. And talking about being moved, I mean, I know you don't mean it in this way, but when we prepared this interview, you said that you didn't really want to talk about feeling. You prefer to talk about facts. You were with a crew of younger divers, and some were extremely moved. How do you explain the different perception of those divers experimenting a dive on those mass grave that became those ships so differently?
You're probably going to hear a recurring theme, right? And everyone should, right? Because, like I've said, a global system of white supremacy is just that, it's global, right? And it affects everyone differently, right? The members of the Enslaved dive team, Alana, Josh, Kinga, myself, we all have different life experiences. I'm a little bit older, right? So my experiences and connection are going to be different. Josh is younger than me and lived his life on the West Coast, right? I lived my life on the East Coast, right? Racism is affected by geography. Racism is affected by skin color. I am darker than Josh is. Racism is affected by what occurs in the north of the country and in the south of the country. Racism is affected by what people perceive to be your socioeconomic status. So, and by age. Right? So, Josh's experience is going to be different from mine. Right? Alana's experience is going to be different from Josh's and mine because she's a female. Right? Kinga's experience is going to be different from Alana's and Josh's and mine because she's white.
Right.
I'm sorry. Right. I hate going there. She's Polish by birth. Right. The idea of white and black is a construct. Right. Also a banner of the global system of white supremacy, identifying races when people are technically defined by land masses, right? People from Africa, people from Europe, people from the Americas. Right? It was the system of white supremacy that said there's white people, and then there's everybody else. So we're going to classify ourselves as white, right, and pure, and everything else is other.
Right.
Right. So I slip into language just like everyone does. Right. But we all have different experiences and different perspectives, but it's all based off of that system that is conditioning you by keeping you housed in particular neighborhoods and not letting you out, which was the government's part in that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you had government that worked within the system of white supremacy. You had the private sector that worked in the system, that worked and works in the system of white supremacy, right? So we all have different, not only perspectives, but different engagement with white supremacy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And everyone's perspective has to be recognized, acknowledged, and appreciated. So I try to make room for other voices, right? Because I have absolutely no understanding of what it is like to grow up as a Black man in the South.
Right.
Right. Or a fair-skinned Black woman in the Midwest.
Of course. Yeah.
Right. So,
Okay. Thank you. Well, we're arriving at the end of this interview. There would be so much more to talk about. Now, maybe more questions will arise with the follow-up interviews I'm going to have tomorrow. I've got an interview with Sean Kingsley, who is an historian, and we'll talk more about the history of the slave trade.
And
Before I let you go, sorry?
And F-35.
Yeah. I don't know if you will be listening in, but it should be fascinating. Kramer, before I let you go, one question I always ask my guest is, what is America to you?
What's America to me? It's an experiment, right? An experiment that is still in progress, right? It's been, for me, much of it has been an ugly experiment, right? But I'm hopeful that eventually the equation will balance out.
Okay. Okay, Kramer, thank you so much for your time today. Is there anything you want to add?
Diving with a Purpose is a volunteer nonprofit organization, right? All of the work that we do is done by a dedicated group of professionals that are dependent on donations and support in order to get missions done. So to the extent that you are a supporter of the mission, right, I would encourage people to go to our website and donate, so that, or become involved, right, so that we can continue to tell these stories. Because right now, with 1,000 or so ships that never made it, we've only really documented about 5.
Wow.
All right. So there's a lot of work to do.
So how can we find your website?
Diving with a Purpose, full name.org.
Easy enough.
Yeah.
Kramer, thank you so much, and have a good day.
All right.